r/AskReddit, Redditors who are a missing person. What's your story? Got tired of my dad kicking the shit out of me, so I ran away at 15. KSB found me less than a week later drunk as fuck in the train yard by where I lived. Dad was pretty upset, but he got sober and stopped being a dick after that. My parents stopped talking to each other since I was 5, but they still lived together. One day, my father took me, 9F at the time, to go shopping with him. We came back to find all the neighborhood looking for me and screaming my name. Well, my mother was relieved, but my parents had their 1,245,543rd fight again. This could have been avoided with one phone call. I wish they could just divorce. When I was young, probably about 6 I think, my family went on vacation to Yosemite. We stayed in a small cabin at a campground. I met another kid who was a bit older than me, and we went exploring. Apparently we went a bit too far, and eventually ran into a bear cub. We just stood and stared at each other for a few minutes and went our separate ways. When I got back to the cabin, I found out that park rangers had been out looking for me because my parents had no idea where I was. For some reason they didn't think my bear story was as cool as I did. My sister once had the entire neighborhood, the police department, and God knows who else out looking for her. It turns out, she had crawled behind the sofa, and fell asleep on top of an air conditioning vent for about 5 hours. My mom went inside as the sun started to go down, and sat down on the couch to cry. My sister then crawled out from behind the couch, and started petting her on the head, asking her what was wrong. Not really missing, but my parents flipped and filed a missing person report when they couldn't find me. I was left at Walmart by them. The only reason they found me was because they retraced their steps and Walmart was paging them every 5 minutes. How did they forget that they left you at Walmart? You'd think they'd have realized that before they filled out a missing person report. You'd be surprised. I used to work at IKEA. People would forget a lot of things / people there. The saddest thing is that it wasn't always forgetting. I remember a case where a little child was dropped off at the kids area, max 1 hour time allowed, and was still there after 3 hours. A search was conducted of the entire store, but the parents were nowhere to be found. They eventually showed up in the early evening. Turns out they went to the seaside for a day and didn't want to take their kid. In 2nd grade, I fell asleep on the school bus ride home and missed my stop. My mom always waited at my stop to meet me, and freaked out when I didn't get off the bus. The bus driver looked back, and since I was lying down fast asleep, he didn't see me. An hour later, I woke up at a random school bus terminal on the outskirts of town, and my mom had phoned half the town freaking out. Funny story to tell now, but my poor mother was convinced I had been kidnapped for a solid 2 hours. It really took a lot out of her. Not me, but my brother was missing for around a year. He disappeared before, but only for a few days. He suffers from paranoid schizophrenia and would often get delusional, but this time he didn't turn up. We live in NYC and my parents had no idea where to look for him. They'd regularly go to the police station and look at pictures of bodies that had turned up. He didn't have any friends or girlfriends we could ask about him. He had just vanished. A year later we got a call from a hospital in DC. My brother had been picked up on the street, nearly dead from malnutrition. He'd gone to Washington to warn the government about something or other. He off-eb refused to eat, believing his food was poison, and lived on the streets for a year. The only reason he survived was because other homeless people took care of him and convinced him to occasionally eat something. He was a skeleton when they found him, full of flea bites. Eventually my parents nursed him back to health. He's still mentally ill but hasn't tried to disappear again. I think about him whenever I see a homeless person. I was kidnapped by my biological mother and missing for 3 months when I was a year old. My bio mother has a horrendous crystal meth habit, took me during a court-mandated visitation and kept me in her various users/sellers' houses. When I was found, I hadn't been changed in days. I was in damp clothing and I had been given C-Ook syrup daily to keep quiet. She was arrested and eventually released. I got lost at Six Flags as a kid and it seemed like the entire police force was looking for me. It was my first day in kindergarten. I was supposed to go to the after-school daycare, but I lost the note saying I was supposed to. So the teacher shoved me onto the bus and told the bus driver where I lived. Not sure if that's actually how it went down, but regardless they made me leave. The bus drops little 5-year-old me off at home. All the doors are locked and my mother wouldn't even get out of work for another 2 to 3 hours. So I do what any little kid does, I sit on my front porch and cry. Luckily I lived right across the street from the high school and this angel of a woman sees me from the bleachers while a soccer game was going on. She comes over to check on me and stays with me the entire time. Meanwhile at the school the staff is going crazy because I'm nowhere to be found. My mother was called and as I'm told, crying profusely. Then out of the blue I see this 1960s brown Cadillac pull up and over walks my principal. He thanks the women for taking care of me and brings me back to the school. Because of my situation they suspended my teacher and the bus driver, and I never do anything without proper paperwork. Edit. Just talked to my mother and apparently the teacher left because of major medical issues at the time. Something similar happened to me when I was little. I'm mentally disabled, but not enough that people care. My parents always gave me a note to hand to the teacher to let them know if I was supposed to go home or to a babysitter that day so they could make sure I got on the right bus because I wouldn't be able to figure it out on my own. One day I forgot the note. For some reason instead of calling my mom or my babysitter and asking where I was supposed to go they just put me on the bus home. I didn't know what to do when I got home and it was all locked up so I started walking to my babysitter's house about a mile away until a family friend driving by spotted me and picked me up. No teachers got in trouble. Was never reported but my dad once forgot me at a cafe in the mid-90s during a time when local police was looking for this guy. Dutroux was convicted in 1989 for the abduction and rape of 5 young girls etc. Because everyone was paranoid at the time, my mom had made me learn my full name, my address, our phone number and my parents' work phone numbers by heart and so when people realized that I was alone they were able to call my mom at work. Shortly after my dad showed up absolutely horrified. He had forgotten that he'd taken me with him. Make your kids learn your phone number by heart. My mother was on the phone with the police after I fell asleep in a cemetery for 7 hours after school. I had a shit home life, so I'd be anywhere and everywhere I could be to not go home. Beginning of the school year was still really nice outside, so I decided to hit the Dunkin' Donuts near my house, grab some coffee, and I walked to the cemetery. Why that was maybe 10 minutes walk from my house. There was a really nice mausoleum in the cemetery, which happened to be the structure at the highest point in the city, so you can, on a clear day, see about 15 miles. I chilled there for a while, just kinda thinking. About 300 feet away is a statue of Jesus on the cross, with other figures. I was kinda tired so I laid a little ways away from it, just enough to get some shade, not enough to be laying on it, and I listened to music until I passed out. Woke up a few hours later, figured fuck it, might as well go home and my mother started losing her shit. He just walked in, I'm so sorry where the fuck were you? I left and went back to the cemetery. My mother threw me away from my family home. It was almost 25 years ago. I was missing person for many years. The worst part was when you call the number from the poster is that you have to answer very private questions about yourself or your past, that only you can know the answer. I did it few years ago. After being missing for almost 20 years. Those questions were difficult. They asked me about my dog. I swear to God my dog was the only thing I missed all those years. I miss my dog. After a long period of estrangement, I went to visit my mother and father. This was after a long drive and I was quite tired. My mother decided it was the perfect opportunity to berate me. I tried to leave and she blocked my car physically so she could continue to berate me. I just left my car in the driveway and walked to a nearby hotel. I stayed there for a couple days, went back and got my car without seeing them, and drove back home. A few years later I googled myself as I was up for a job and wanted to make sure there wasn't anything stupid on the internet about me. I found out they reported me missing. I called the government and got it removed. Edit. This was over a decade ago and I do not recall which government agency I contacted. It was either a sheriff's department or a local police department website which publicly displayed my photo and my mother's nonsense. Edit. And yes, you're right, it does sound weird that I called the government. Considering the extent these events upset me, it makes me happy to laugh about it now. I was reported missing for a few days because I ran away from home at 16. I ran away with my 17-year-old boyfriend, who was not reported missing by his parents. My parents had read through some of my chat messages, I had a habit of saving logs, and knew I was likely heading north or west, but weren't sure. Thankfully, since I was listed as missing and they knew who I was with, the guy was being monitored and he used his debit card on the way, so they had an idea where I'd be. Cops came with a search warrant to the place we were staying a couple hours before we were going to head off west. We already had a new car ready to go, with some cash. To make it harder to be tracked, we're gonna leave later that night. I'm very lucky. If we'd taken off before the cops found me, There's a more than decent chance I'd have stayed missing and life would have been very bad. I married the guy a couple months later and he was an abusive asshole. His manipulations and isolation of me were a huge factor in the running away also. I had a decent stay at a sheep farm while a ward of the state though, waiting for my parents to arrive and get me. That was neat. Then I got home and a family friend came over to scream at me about how I was trying to murder her daughter and that I was a disgrace. Not so neat. I've been missing for about 5 years now. It really gives you a new perspective on how many missing people, particularly adults, either just don't want to be found or simply haven't contacted the particular people who filed their report. The people who know where I am and what happened are the people I want to know that information. For a while I was homeless and met several others who were also in the database or on the Charlie Project. Circumstances take you to places you never thought you'd go. It's not always as simple as being snatched off the street. And the ones who reported me didn't get anywhere by doing so. My trail went to a website of 150,000 plus other missing adults and just hangs out there perpetually cold. I'm fine with that. I have really strict parents and they absolutely did not want me to have a boyfriend. Instead of doing what they wanted, I went and got a boyfriend, age 17, almost 18, behind their backs and would routinely sneak out to hang with him. One night, he dropped me off at home and my mom saw us kiss. She flipped her shit and started beating the hell out of me and threatened to kill me. So, when everyone went to sleep, I packed all my stuff in the middle of the night and left. I walked to my boyfriend's house, clear on the other side of town, and stayed with him. Woke up to multiple threats from my parents about how they were going to charge him with kidnapping or with being a sexual predator. He was 20 at the time. I stayed there until they filed a missing persons report and the police came and took me home. I ended up dating him for 2 years anyway lol. Did you make it through the whole video? If so, thank you for your time. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. Have a good day, or night, or evening, or morning, or whatever.